The morning of my brother's wedding, I told myself I would stay quiet. I had driven 4 hours from Ottawa to get there through sleet and gray skies, and the kind of February cold that gets into your coat no matter how well you've zipped it. I told myself the whole way down that I wasn't going to make anything difficult. I was going to smile, sit in the back, watch my brother marry the woman he loved, and leave before the dinner speeches started. No one needed to know I was there for longer than that. I had already turned off my phone and tucked it into my coat pocket when my father saw me. He was standing near the entrance of the venue, a converted barn outside of Kingston, the kind of place that costs more than it looks, talking to my aunt and 2 people I didn't recognize. He was wearing a dark navy suit. His hair had gone more gray than I remembered. For a moment he didn't react, and I thought maybe, we were going to get through the first 30 seconds without anything happening. Then he crossed the room toward me. "What are you doing here?" he said. He kept his voice low but not low enough. "Marcus invited me," I said. "He called me 3 weeks ago." My father shook his head slowly, the way he always did when he thought I was saying something foolish. "He didn't tell me that." "That's between him and you," I said. "I'm not here to cause any problems. I just want to see him get married." He looked at me the way he had been looking at me for years, like I was a problem he hadn't solved yet, like my presence in a room was itself a kind of disruption. I was 31 years old, and that look still did something to my chest that I couldn't quite name. "This is a family event," he said. "I am family." He didn't answer that. He just looked at me a moment longer, then said, quietly and with absolute certainty, "You should go, Claire. I want to tell you that I said something sharp and perfect. I want to tell you that I stood my ground, but I had driven 4 hours and slept badly the night before, and I was so tired, not just from the drive, but from the years of it, the long accumulation of being told, in one way or another, that I was the one who didn't quite fit." So I nodded. I turned toward the door. I told myself it was the right thing to do, the clean thing, the thing that didn't make a scene at my brother's wedding. I was 3 steps from the exit when I heard Marcus's voice behind me. "Claire." I stopped. I heard his footsteps, and then his hand was on my arm, and I turned around to find my brother in his wedding suit, a gray wool jacket, a white shirt, looking more nervous and more grown-up than I had ever seen him, and he was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You came," he said. "You asked me to." He glanced over my shoulder toward where my father was still standing. Something moved across his face. Then he looked back at me and said, carefully, "Will you stay? Please." I almost said no. I almost told him it was fine, that I understood, that I didn't want to make his day harder. But he was my brother, and he had called me 3 weeks ago and said, "I want you there," and so I said yes. I found a seat near the back, in the last row, beside a woman I didn't know who smiled briefly at me and then looked back at her program. The barn was warm and lit with string lights, and there were white flowers everywhere. It was genuinely beautiful. I sat with my hands in my lap and looked at the arch at the front where Marcus would stand in a few minutes, and I let myself be there. I should tell you something about my family, so you understand what I mean when I say that my being there was complicated. I grew up in a small town outside of Barrie, 3 kids, my parents, a house that was always a little too cold in winter because my father kept the heat low to save money. My father worked in insurance. My mother taught elementary school part-time and ran most of the household the rest of the time. They were not unkind people. They were people who had a very clear picture of what a good life looked like, and they measured everything against that picture. Marcus was the one who fit. He went to Western, studied business, got a job in finance in Toronto, bought a condo in his late 20s. He called every Sunday. He remembered birthdays. He was easy to love. And I say that without resentment. Marcus is genuinely one of the best people I know. My sister Diane was the middle child, quieter, steadier. She became a nurse, which my parents understood and respected. She moved to Hamilton and had 2 kids, and called almost as often as Marcus. And then there was me. I left Barrie at 18 on a full scholarship to the University of Ottawa Science Program, which my parents thought was impractical. I was home for Christmas in first year, and told them I wanted to go into medicine. My father said carefully that I should think about whether that was realistic. I said I was already thinking about it. He said medical school was very competitive and perhaps I should have a backup plan. I said I had a plan. By second year, I had stopped going home as often. By fourth year, I had stopped explaining myself at all. I graduated, applied to medical school, got into the University of Toronto Faculty of Medicine. I called to tell them. My mother said that was wonderful. My father said he hoped I knew what I was getting into. That was 12 years ago. In those 12 years, I had finished medical school, completed a residency in internal medicine, done a 2-year fellowship in nephrology, and taken a position at the Ottawa Hospital as a staff physician. I had published research. I had a team of residents I supervised. I had a small apartment near the Glebe with plants that had somehow all survived, and a colleague named Dr. Patel who was my closest friend, and a life that was, by any reasonable measure, full and meaningful. My family knew I was a doctor in a vague, general sense. They knew I worked at a hospital in Ottawa. They did not know the specifics, because the specifics had never seemed to interest them, and I had eventually stopped offering information that wasn't asked for. This is the part people don't understand. I didn't hide my life out of arrogance. I didn't do it to be mysterious, or to set up some dramatic reveal. I did it because I had spent years trying to share things with my family and watching their eyes glaze over, or watching my father redirect to something Marcus had accomplished, or listening to my mother say, "That's nice, but are you eating properly?" I did it because at some point, protecting myself started to feel more necessary than being understood. I sat in the back row of my brother's wedding and watched him walk to the front of the room, and when he turned and saw me, he smiled, and I felt something in my chest loosen slightly. The ceremony was beautiful. His wife, Renee, was warm and funny, and looked at Marcus like he was the most solid thing she had ever found. I cried a little, which I hadn't expected. The woman beside me passed me a small packet of tissues without comment, which felt like a very Canadian thing to do. Afterward, during the cocktail hour, I stayed near the edges of the room. I found a spot near one of the high-top tables with a glass of sparkling water and watched people navigate the space. My aunt found me and hugged me and didn't ask any difficult questions. A cousin I hadn't seen in 6 years shook my hand and immediately got pulled away. I was doing fine. I was getting through it. Then my father appeared. He had a glass of wine and the expression of someone who had made a decision. He came and stood beside me without preamble. "You stayed," he said. "Marcus wanted me here." "Claire," he set his glass down on the table. "I'm not going to pretend the last few years haven't been difficult. But I think you need to hear something." He paused. "This family has put a lot of effort into keeping things together. Marcus and Diane both work very hard to maintain relationships, to show up, to be present. And then there's you." I kept my voice even. "And then there's me. You've been absent. For years. Holidays, family events, you always have some excuse, some work thing, some reason you can't come. I've been building a career. So has Marcus. So has Diane. They still manage to show up." I took a breath. "I hear you. I do. But I don't think this is the time or place. I'm trying to talk to you as your father. I know. And I'm asking you to let today be Marcus's day." He looked at me. "I just think if you're going to be part of this family, you need to start acting like it. You can't just drift in and out when it suits you. I want to tell you that sentence didn't land. I want to tell you I was too certain of myself by then to be hurt by it. But drift was a word he had used before years ago, when I told him I was doing research, when I said I wasn't sure I wanted to move back to Ontario right away. You've always just drifted, Claire. And something about hearing it again, in that room, on that day, made me feel like I was 22 years old again, and not 31, not a physician, not someone who had built something real. I set down my glass. "I should find Marcus," I said. "We're not finished." "I think we are," I said. "For today." I started to move away from the table. My father raised his voice slightly, not enough to make a scene, but enough that the couple, standing 6 feet away, glanced over. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," he said. "You walk away. You always walk away, and then you wonder why the family doesn't feel close." I stopped. I turned around. "I don't wonder that," I said quietly. "I stopped wondering that a long time ago." There was a beat of silence. I turned again and walked toward the hallway that led to the restrooms because I needed 30 seconds away from the room. I was standing in the corridor taking a breath when I heard footsteps, and a man I didn't recognize came around the corner. He was in his early 40s, tallish, wearing a wedding guest suit, and he stopped short when he saw me. "Sorry," he said. "I was looking for the actually, wait." He paused. He looked at me with an expression that shifted from casual to something more careful. "Are you Dr. Claire Whitmore?" I looked at him. "Yes." He exhaled. "I thought so. I'm David Arsenault. My wife was your patient at the Ottawa Hospital about 2 years ago. Rachel Arsenault. She had he paused. The kidney complications after surgery. It took me only a moment. I remember Rachel, I said. She wanted me to say something if I ever ran into you. He looked slightly embarrassed. She said you were the one who caught what the first team missed. She said she'd be dead if it weren't for you. He shook his head. She'd be furious. I'm making this awkward, but she really did mean it. She talks about you to everyone. I didn't know what to say. I said, I'm glad she's well. She's fantastic, he said. Running a half marathon in the spring, which her cardiologist thinks is too ambitious, but that's Rachel. He smiled. Are you here for Marcus or Renee's side? Marcus is my brother, I said. Something crossed his face. Oh, he said. Then, carefully, he's talked about his sister, the doctor in Ottawa. Probably not much, I said. He looked at me for a moment like he was trying to work something out. Then he said, Renee and Rachel went to school together. I've been hearing about this wedding for 8 months. He paused. I think you should come back into the reception. I was going to, I said. He said, I think you should let me walk you back in. I didn't entirely understand what he meant, but something in his tone made me not argue. We came back into the cocktail hour and David moved through the room with purpose, and I found myself drawn along in his wake. My father was still near the high-top table, now talking to my aunt. Marcus was across the room with Renee, both of them surrounded by people offering congratulations. David steered us toward Marcus. Marcus, David said, congratulations, incredible day. They shook hands. I have to say something and I hope it's all right. He glanced at me, then back at Marcus and Renee. I didn't realize until just now that your sister is Dr. Claire Whitmore. Marcus looked at me. Claire's a doctor, yeah. Nephrologist, David said. Staff physician at the Ottawa Hospital. My wife was her patient 2 years ago. Rachel, you've met Rachel. She was at your engagement party. He paused. Rachel had an acute kidney injury that got missed on first presentation. Your sister was on call, came in on a Saturday night, reviewed everything herself, caught it, and spent the next 48 hours managing a situation that could have ended very differently. He stopped. My wife is alive because of your sister's judgment. The room hadn't gone completely quiet, but the people near us had. My aunt had turned. My father had turned. Marcus looked at me with an expression I couldn't read, something between pride and pain, and a question he didn't quite know how to ask. Renee reached over and took my hand. He has talked about you, she said quietly. He told me you were the smartest person he knew. He just didn't know how to, she stopped. He didn't know how to bridge things. My father said nothing. He was standing very still. David seemed to realize he had walked into something larger than a simple introduction, and he said, gently, I'll let you all sorry. I just needed her to know, and then he moved tactfully away. The space between me and my father felt enormous. It was my aunt who spoke first. She said, Claire, I didn't know any of this. There was never much opportunity, I said. You never said. No one asked, I said. And it came out more plainly than I intended, not as an accusation but as a fact, a simple, flat fact that sat in the air between all of us. My father looked at me. For the first time in as long as I could remember, he looked uncertain. I didn't know you were, he started. I know, I said. A specialist. At the Ottawa Hospital. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. I watched him process it, not just the information, but what it meant, what he had said to me an hour ago, what he had been saying for years. Why didn't you tell us? He said. And I heard something in his voice that I hadn't heard before, not quite guilt, but the thing that comes just before it. I looked at him. I thought about everything I could say. I thought about the years of redirected conversations, the glazed eyes, the way he talked about Marcus's year-end bonus at the same dinner where I mentioned I had passed my fellowship exams. I thought about being 22 and 26 and 29 and sitting at the kitchen table in Barrie trying to explain what I was doing with my life and feeling, every time, like I was speaking a language no one in that room had chosen to learn. I said, I tried. He opened his mouth, closed it. I tried for a long time, I said. And then I stopped trying and just focused on the work. And the work has been good. I took a breath. I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad. I'm telling you because you asked. My brother had come to stand beside me. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, and I felt the warmth of that more than I could say. My father looked at the floor for a moment. Then he looked up at me. I think, he said slowly, that I owe you something. I waited. He stopped. Started again. I've had a picture in my head of who you were. and I didn't update it. He stopped again. That was wrong. It was not a complete apology. It was not everything I might have wanted. But it was the first honest thing he had said to me in years, maybe longer, and I felt something shift in the room that I didn't have a word for yet. "It's Marcus's wedding day," I said. "Let's not do the whole thing right now." He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. Marcus put his arm around my shoulders briefly and said, quietly, near my ear, "I'm glad you stayed." I thought about the drive down through the February sleet, the 4 hours of telling myself to be prepared for exactly this, the way I had almost turned around twice near Napanee when the weather got bad and some part of me said this isn't worth it. They don't want you there. Yeah, I said, me too. I stayed for dinner. I stayed for the speeches. And my aunt cried during Marcus's. And Renee's maid of honor was very funny and said things that made everyone laugh, including my father. I sat at a table near the middle of the room and ate the salmon and talked to David's wife Rachel. When she came and found me, she was exactly as David had described, direct and warm and funny, and she grabbed my hand and said, "I told everyone about you," and I believed her. My father found me once more before the night ended. He came to where I was standing near the bar and said, "Without preamble, I'd like to hear about your work sometime. If you're willing." I looked at him. He was 70 years old. He was not going to become a different person. But he was standing here, in his navy suit, asking. "Okay," I said. "I'm willing." He nodded. He didn't hug me. We were not people who had been hugging, but he stayed, and he asked me a question about nephrology, something about what exactly a kidney specialist does on a daily basis, and I answered him, and he listened. He actually listened. He asked a follow-up question. I answered that too. It was small. It was the beginning of something rather than the thing itself. But I was 31 years old and my father was listening to me talk about my work. Really listening. For what felt like the first time. I drove back to Ottawa the next morning under a sky that had finally cleared. Gray giving way to blue over the 401, the kind of sharp winter light that makes everything look like it's been cut clean. I had a coffee in a paper cup from a Tim Hortons near Brockville, and I let the highway unspool ahead of me, and I thought about what my colleague Dr. Patel had said to me once, after a particularly hard week when I'd told her I sometimes wondered whether I had traded my family for my career. She had said, "You didn't trade anything. You built something. Those are different." I hadn't fully believed her then. I was starting to.